Isaac Poritzky was a German writer of Russian Jewish descent, writing under the pseudonym of Jakob Elias Poritzky. Born in 1876 at Lomża in modern-day Poland, presumably the youngest son of merchant Abraham Jakob Poritzky and Jenny Rosenbaum. When aged only a few months, his family moved to Karlsruhe, Germany, where Isaac would attend school. Isaac's father was apparently very strict, not allowing his son to read and burning his books when he caught him. Following his education, he worked in several different shops and businesses, though he really wanted to devote himself to the theatre. At age 18 he went to Berlin to study philosophy. In 1901 he married Helene Orzolkowski. Between 1911 and 1914 he worked at the Hebel Theatre. In 1915 he became the theatre director of the Grand Ducal Court Theatre in Karlsruhe, a post he held until 1916. Between 1926 and 1932 he worked at Funkstunde Berlin, the first radio station in Germany. He died in 1935 at Berlin. His Gespenstergeschichten, or Ghost Stories, was published in 1913. This review took quite a while, as until a few days ago, only half of the original collection was made available to modern readers. Thankfully, the remainder of the collection has recently been released for free by Ngiev Books, and thus the entire collection, impossible to be purchased in its 1913 original edition, can once again be read by modern readers. Muabali is the story of a narrator meeting with a strange and mysterious woman who forces her way into his apartment one night. It turns out she is in fact the ancient Egyptian queen Muabali, an oracle worshipped as a goddess in ancient times, being the emissary of various gods, bringing both good and bad luck, marking anyone her gaze falls on to die within a couple of days, and making the dead rise from the grave to dance with her. Muabali takes the narrator to her apartments, but before things can proceed, she turns into a cat and runs off. Bahar Japhet is the story of the titular Japhet, a misanthrope living in a cabin in the woods with his daughter, one with nature and despising the outside world. His daughter Siva soon grows tired of this life, however, and tries to run away to the city, going so far as to force her father to take her after she burns down their hut. In the city, she makes constant demands, until her father is thrown in prison, and she is reduced to abject poverty, and is only saved from death at the hand of a would-be suitor, thanks to the intervention of a butterfly, which she dreams is her departed father. Das Gespenst, or the spirit, has the narrator made to spend the night at the grave of Lance Officer Batu, where he is visited by the skeleton of his departed friend, who keeps insisting that death really isn't such a big thing, and advising the narrator to shoot himself so his decomposing body can be of use for once. Die Versteinerten, or Turned to Stone, is a short story relating how a group of diggers sent to dig up an old graveyard and dispose of its dead were turned to stone. Die Versunkene Stadt, or The Sunken City, is a dream a man experiences while going under during a dental procedure. In the dream, he is an Arabian prince whose father entertains a sheikh at his palace after the sheikh had been robbed. In thankfulness, the sheikh reveals to the prince that, by making an animal sacrifice upon a certain grave at a certain time of year, one will acquire a key that opens up the passage to a sunken city and become its ruler and the appointed husband of its beautiful queen. But one must remain absolutely quiet for a whole year, or the city will disappear and one would be left to die of hunger in the desert. The prince then goes on a lengthy and peril-filled journey in order to reach the city, experiencing hunger, despair, and the threat of death on every turn before waking up. Peter Bro's Geständnis, or Peter Bro's Confession, is the longest story in the collection and originally came out as a novella in 1907. It is the diary of Peter Bro, the son of a madwoman who died in an asylum. Bro meets and marries a young woman, but as they are very poor, she soon grows sickly and dies after her parents remove her from the hospital and prevent him from seeing her. They also take the narrator's son and adopt him, keeping him away from his father. While this is happening, Bro murders an old acquaintance just for the hell of it, afterwards routinely seeing the ghost of his wife trying to make him confess. But it turns out the one thing that leads to him being arrested is the fact he wrote all this down in his diary. Der Prophet der Zahl, or The Prophet of the Number, is the story of a brilliant man locked up in an insane asylum who tries to find God by counting grains of sand, and thus come to God by visualizing each grain in the thousands and tens of thousands and eventually millions. Eines Nachts, or One Night, is a conversation between the narrator and a strange old man who tells him various stories of split personality and malicious doppelgangers. Der Hellseher, or The Seer, is the story of an old German-American seer whose accurate predictions hold sway through the financial world and who terrifies the narrator with a very accurate knowledge of his deepest held hopes and fears. Der Unbekannte, or The Unknown, narrates the story of a man who, for 14 days, is being hounded by a strange presence in his apartment, of which he is absolutely convinced, so much so that one night he runs out of his apartment screaming, forcing his way into a neighbor's apartment out of sheer terror. Im Reiche der Geister, or In the Realm of the Ghosts, has a young student following the burial train of the woman he is in love with, who then stalks her grave after she is buried, until she is suddenly raised from the dead by a malicious old witch and her cat digging her out of the ground for the sake of a blasphemous corpse marriage. Katayama is the tale of a poor Japanese man whose traumatic experience of nearly freezing to death while also starving drove him to start murdering all his newborn children as soon as they were born, and it was recorded by a doomed German Orientalist and found in his papers after his death. The stories here run the gamut of darker tales in the vein of Finn the Cecil, or however you pronounce it, dark grotesque stories, oriental fantasies in the vein of Théophile Gautier, tales reminiscent of the Arabian Nights, and tales more on the philosophical side. There isn't one bad story in the lot, and it shows off Poritzky's very extensive range. I am glad this forgotten collection can be brought to a new generation of readers.